Hi guys, Nadine here. So I am sorry about technical difficulties. I seem to be having a lot of those lately. I'm telling you, I'm not liking the OBS and Linux. It is starting to really annoy me, but hey, what do you do? Um, if there's anybody here, thanks for coming by. I am just gonna tweet it out and get all that kind of stuff started here and see where it goes from there. Let's see. Um, Retweet. So, how's everybody doing today? Let's see. I don't know what I'm gonna be doing today. I'm just gonna start the book up and we'll figure it out. Figure it out from there. And STE and let's see here. Yeah, so chapters 11 to 14 of Venus Boy. And we'll get that going. Yay. Remember, folks, this is a professional operation. 100% all the time professional. And if he believes that I got a bit of property and I don't know where to sell you, but hey, you know, that's not the point. Let's see. Let's see. We'll do there. Yeah, that's where I want it to play. Yay. Okay. So, what I got here is old pair of socks from last year. Oh, they're very dark, aren't they? Man, what a pain. I'm having such trouble with my colors. Anyway, let's see. It's just not coming through very well. Okay, fine. Fine, fine, fine. I'm gonna turn those back and we're just gonna go screw it and do this instead. And, yeah, so, let's see here. Let's see if anybody's come by. Anybody come by? Hello? Hello out there? No. I might have to cry and bawl a little bit. Oh. But that's okay. I'm going to start her up and have a look and see if I got the audiobooks done up properly and all that kind of fun stuff. So I hope you guys enjoy. I'm gonna work on it with this color because we can see this color. Imagine that. We can see this color. I have to get this working on Windows again. it's been a pain in the arse, and without the mouse hasn't been working on Windows, so it's been causing problems with the, if your mouse isn't moving right, your nothing is working. And this is kind of weird because I'm listening through my headset. Yeah, and so I'm doubling back on myself, but that's okay too. I feel like I'm talking to myself sometimes, so blah. Anyway, we'll get chapters 11 to. I gotta turn this down. This is awful. Okay, I'll get chapters 11 to 14 done because we did Ted Nerd the other day when I was having problems in my mouth. My um, camera stopped working. At least now I've got it so that I can pause the playback when I switch scenes, so I can actually make it so that I can fix the cameras without having to shut it all down. So yay! Anyway, one step at a time, right? Hate the technical difficulties, but this is life, and that's the way it is. So anyway, I'll start her up, and then I'll go grab my coffee because I left it over there. Of course, I left my coffee over there because who wants your coffee over here with you? Okay. You guys enjoy, and we'll talk to you when we get back. Bye.
Chapter 11 of Venus Boy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. Venus Boy by Lee Sutton. Chapter 11. The friends are separated. Johnny was hot and sweaty. He was glad to see the cool, dark cave ahead. It was like home to him by now. The mother leopard was lying in front of the cave, and the two cubs came running to greet him. "Hi, Pat. Hi, Mike," he called. They came up to be petted. "They seem to be happy to see us," Baba clicked as he bounced along. "And I'm glad to see them," Johnny said. "Golly, I'm hot." Baba and he had just been down the river trying to find a place where they might cross. Immediately after the long Venus night was over, they had gone exploring in hopes of finding a colony of wild marva nearby. But the only diamond wood groves close to the cave were still too close to the settlement. The marva must have left them because of the danger. The two had gathered a good supply of nuts for Baba, but otherwise the trip had been useless. Though they were still afraid of the horned river snakes, there was no way of avoiding crossing the river. If they went downstream, they would soon be in rhinosaur marshes. Upstream, the river curved back toward the colony. Johnny and Baba had spent the whole long night in the cave, and Johnny had got to know the leopard family quite well. He had discovered they too had something like a language. It was made up of different kinds of growls. Each growl meant something, but there weren't many of them. The mother leopard could say things like "come" or "go" to her kittens. She had a different growl for each of them, though Johnny named them Pat and Mike. Throughout the time Baba was asleep, Johnny had practiced these growls until he could talk a little in the leopard language. He had also taught the little ones to like meat fruit roasted over the open fire he had had to light to keep warm. All three cats had been afraid of the fire when he had first lit it. They had soon learned that it was harmless if they didn't step into it. They were very smart animals, but by no means as smart as Baba. Baba was just as clever as a person. All the rest of the animals now seemed friendly, too. Johnny thought he knew why. Not only the leopards, but all the animals could talk. They couldn't say much, but just enough to tell one another Johnny wouldn't hurt them. And all of them could understand the marva language. He and Baba talked about this, but they weren't yet ready to take a chance on river snakes. The snakes stayed deep in the water and struck before they could be seen. It didn't seem likely that they would have learned Johnny was a friend. Baba was going to go down to the river by himself. Perhaps he could find one of the horned snakes and bring it back with him. Then Johnny could make friends with it. If what Johnny thought was true, then the snake would tell the others, and he and Baba could float safely across the river on a log they had found. After patting the mother leopard on the head, Johnny took off his pack and laid it in the mouth of the cave. "I think I'll go over to the waterfall and have a shower," he said. "That's not such a good idea," Baba said. "Stay here. I won't be gone long." "Oh, stop worrying, Grandfather," Johnny laughed. He was stripping himself down to his shorts. The three leopards sat on their haunches watching him. They were fascinated by his clothes. The first time he had taken them off, they had been almost afraid of him. "I'll take Mama Leopard along with me for a guard," Johnny said. "You tell her, Baba. Maybe I can growl better than you, but she still seems to do everything you say." Baba clicked directions to the leopard. She was to go along with Johnny and protect him. When Baba was through clicking, the mother leopard came over and licked Johnny, making a growling sound that meant she understood. Then, with a wave of his paw, Baba bounced away toward the river. Johnny was happy to see him go. Baba himself had suggested that the trip be taken. It was the first time he had ever offered to leave Johnny for such a long time. Johnny loved the little bear, and it was fun in the jungle, but he couldn't help wishing he were home. The waterfall was not much of a waterfall. A little way from the leopard's cave was a small spring high up in the rocks. A tiny stream of water fell about 10 feet, making a great spray and quite a little noise. It made a wonderful shower. The mother leopard lay on the rocks below while Johnny climbed up to the waterfall. Johnny danced about as the cool water hit his hot, dusty skin. It felt wonderful running all over him. Then he walked into the pool and splashed happily. Then Johnny began to sing. With him, the little waterfall sang a tinkling, merry tune that blotted out even the chatter of the birds in the surrounding trees. It did not block out a coughing roar that came from the mother leopard. Johnny knew that sound. It meant come. Johnny stopped singing and looked around. The leopardess was on her feet now, looking into the sky. Johnny looked too. A helicopter floated soundlessly overhead, its jets off. Johnny looked around for some place to hide. There was none. The mother leopard crouched. Her muscles rippled under her black and gold skin. In one mighty spring she was beside him. Before Johnny knew what was happening, her great jaws opened and closed around him. The long saber teeth barely touched his skin. With no more effort than if she were carrying a feather, she leaped through the air with Johnny in her mouth. When she landed, Johnny's feet thumped painfully against a rock. Where she was holding him about the middle in her teeth, he was unharmed. Johnny heard the roar of gunfire as the helicopter's motor switched on. Still carrying Johnny in her jaws, the mother leopard screamed in pain. Johnny was tumbled to the ground, half dazed. A very shaken Johnny watched the mother leopard run away a short distance and then spring back toward him. A second later she was standing over Johnny, putting her body between him and the helicopter. She roared her defiance at the machine. Johnny marveled at her courage. She started to pick him up again. The helicopter was getting into a position where it could hit the big cat without hitting Johnny. In a few seconds the courageous animal would be dead. "Run, friend pet," he clicked loudly. "Run! They won't hurt me. Run!" She looked down at him and growled in a questioning way. Her muscles tensed, and with a great spring she was gone. The guns roared, but the leopard's last bound carried her safely into the brush. Before Johnny could get to his feet, the copter was beside him. Two men in armor and head globes jumped out. "Hurry!" yelled the pilot from inside. "You just grazed the leopard." One man grabbed Johnny by the heels, the other by his shoulders. With one swing he was tossed heavily onto the floor of the copter. The two men jumped in after him. The armored door clanged closed. The motors roared and they were going straight up into the sky. Johnny lay quietly on the floor for some moments. He was still dazed by his fall and by the sudden turn of events. "That leopard was crazy," one of the men was saying. "I never saw one come back like that, except for a cub." Johnny looked up into the face of the speaker. It was a thin, narrow face with full red lips and small black eyes. Johnny didn't know him. "That was a narrow squeak you had," the hunter said to Johnny in a high nasal voice. 2 minutes later you'd have been leopard food. Are you hurt?" Johnny sat up slowly, moving his arms and legs. He said. With a whine of the motors, the copter went into a hover. It floated over the spot where they had picked up Johnny. "What in the name of all the moon devils were you doing out there like that, stark naked and no armor?" "Taking a bath." Johnny was too bewildered to make up an excuse. The man raised his black eyes to heaven and looked at his companion. "Crazy," he muttered. "But kid," he addressed Johnny, "what made—" "Skip it," the pilot said in a low, hard voice. The black-eyed man stopped abruptly. Johnny decided the pilot must be the leader. The man turned around and looked at Johnny. He was a large man, slope-shouldered but powerful. His blond hair was slicked down against his head. Two long red scars cut across a white, heavy-jawed face. His eyes were so pale they were almost white. "Where's the bear?" he snapped. Johnny was struck silent. They were after Baba. "Come on, kid." The low voice came again. "Where's the bear?" "He ran away." Johnny blurted out the first thing he could think of. "I've had an awful time. We got lost in the jungle, and he ran away right at first. I lit fires to attract attention and keep off animals, and the rains put them out, and my matches got wet. I've had an awful time, and—" "You ain't seen nothing of the bear?" the scar-faced pilot cut in. Johnny crossed his fingers carefully and looked the big man straight in the eyes. "Not since right at first." The pale eyes bored into his. Johnny's eyes dropped down. "The kid's lying," the big man said to the others, and turned back to Johnny. "Okay, kid, let's have it straight now." But no matter how much they questioned him or how they threatened, Johnny insisted he didn't know where Baba was. Finally, Ed, the blond, scar-faced leader, gave up. He turned to the others. "You guys search the ground," he commanded, "while I call in to the boss." He turned and dialed the radio telephone on the instrument board of the copter. "Hello," he said. "I want to speak to the boss." There was a pause. "Hello," he said again. "We got the kid. Found him where Stevenson thought he saw the fire." Johnny heard a voice coming back over the instrument. He thought he recognized it, but he couldn't make out any words. "No," the pilot spoke into the instrument. "The kid says the bear ran away, but I think he's lying. We're going to search from the plane. Can't send anybody down because of the leopards. One had the kid when we found him." There was another pause. "No, not hurt. When we're finished, I'll drop him at the colony." There was a long pause. Johnny caught the words, "If I know that bear," and then there were more he couldn't catch. "That's a smart idea," the scar-faced man said. "We'll do just what you said. Okay, be seeing you." The pilot turned back to the other two, who had binoculars trained down into the jungle. "See anything, Barney?" "Not a thing, Ed," the black-eyed man replied. "You, Shorty?" The other man shook his head. "Not even a bird." For over an hour they searched. While they were searching, Ed, the pilot, put in another call and told someone else what had happened. He hinted that even if they didn't find the bear, there was still a way they might get their hands on him. Johnny sat with his fists clenched. He knew they would shoot if Baba showed himself. After an hour went by and the copter had gone over every foot of the surrounding territory, the men had to give up because they were running low on fuel. As they went higher up, Johnny peered out. The copter veered Venus east, away from the colony. At that moment, Johnny's heart sank. The hunters weren't taking him home. Baba would have seen the copter come and go. The little bear would think anyone finding Johnny would take him back to the settlement. Johnny knew just what the little bear would do. He would go back to the settlement looking for Johnny. Johnny had succeeded in keeping those hunters from getting Baba. Now the colonists would get him. Or would they? Suddenly Johnny knew whose voice that had been on the radio telephone. The voice was that of the trader, Willard Harkness. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Venus Boy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Shasta. Oakland, California. Venus Boy by Lee Sutton. Chapter 12. The Price of a Boy. They were in the air over 2 hours, traveling at maximum speed before they arrived at their destination. This turned out to be a small cabin surrounded by the usual high wall, with a space inside the wall for a helicopter and a tank. It was a hunter's hideout, entirely hidden from view by diamondwood trees. The pilot had to work his way through branches and then fly for a time between the trunks of the great trees before hovering in for a landing. A man was standing in the yard waiting for them when they landed. As soon as Ed shut off the copter's motor, the man who was waiting for them yelled, "No arrow birds that I can see. Tell the kid to run for it." The man had been informed about him by the helicopter's radio. "Okay, kid, scoot." Ed jabbed Johnny in the ribs. Johnny scooted. The lodge door slammed behind him as he opened the inner door. The large central room was surprisingly neat. The floor was bare but polished. Some hunting trophies were on the windowless walls. Chained on a perch in one corner of the room, a miserable little scarlet ape sat huddled up with its chin upon its knees. When it saw Johnny, it screamed and chattered. Johnny walked toward it, about to click a greeting. "Better watch out." A red head was thrust from the door of another room. "Ed's monkey is meaner than he is." It was Rick Saunders. "Glad to see you safe." The big red-haired man grinned easily and waved. "Hello," Johnny said. He didn't smile. If Rick were here, it meant only one thing. These were the same men who had stolen the colony's marva claws. He all but glared at Rick Saunders standing in the inner doorway. "You don't seem too happy about being rescued," Rick said with a laugh. "I wasn't rescued. Johnny stopped. He knew he shouldn't have said that. Rick's eyebrows went up. "It seems I heard something about a leopard." "Well, I guess I was rescued, sorta," Johnny admitted lamely. "I guess you were." Rick paused, looking at Johnny. "You sure don't sound very friendly." "I don't like thieves and traitors," Johnny said defiantly. "Wait a minute," Rick began. At that moment the 4 hunters entered the room, cutting off the rest of Rick's sentence. The scar-faced leader spoke to Rick. "You know you're not allowed in here. Get out." His voice was low and threatening. Rick turned to go. "Hold it," called Barney, the narrow-faced hunter. "Carry this into the kitchen." He dropped a haunch of antelope on the floor. His face set and calm, Rick walked slowly past Johnny and hoisted the meat to his shoulder. "Any other orders?" he asked quietly. "Yep," Ed said. "Take the kid with you. Rustle him up clothes of some kind. Then you can put him to work helping you. Come on, Johnny." Rick put his hand on Johnny's shoulder and started for the door. Johnny followed him, shrugging off the friendly hand. The kitchen was even neater than the main room. As soon as they entered the room, Rick tossed the haunch of antelope into the sink. He turned, faced Johnny, and grasped the boy's shoulders with his big freckled hands. He seemed angry. "What's this thieves and traitors business mean?" he demanded. "First you pretended to be on our side," Johnny answered, "and then you let the rhinosaurs get in so's those hunters could steal our marva claws." "So that's what you think," Rick said. He regarded Johnny gravely. "Does the rest of the colony think that, too?" Johnny nodded. "Take a good look at me, Johnny." Rick touched a cloth tied around the middle like an apron. "I'm cook and housekeeper here, not one of the gang. I wasn't pretending anything, and I didn't let any rhinosaurs inside. I came with these outlaws because they had their tank guns leveled on me." "But why did they do that?" Johnny demanded. "Harkness' orders," Rick replied. "Remember his threat?" "I sure do," Johnny said. His eyes grew wide. "I was right," he went on. "I thought Mr. Harkness was the boss those hunters called." "He sure is the boss," Rick said. "He's given out word he'll pay for any information about you and Baba. Any information he gets, he passes on to this bunch. The gang has to work for him, so he'll market their stolen claws and arrange for their passage to Earth. Why, he's even offering to pay double for Baba just to prevent the colony from getting him." "Golly," Johnny breathed. "He really must be sore at us." Johnny sat down on a kitchen stool. It was cold against his bare bottom. He looked up at Rick. "Gosh, I'm sorry, Rick. I mean about thinking you were, well, you know." "That's all right, Johnny." Rick was smiling now. "I'll admit it did look bad. Let's forget it and get you into some clothes. We have a meal to fix." Johnny jumped up. With a friend beside him, things didn't seem quite as bad. Helped by a pair of scissors, Rick soon had him into a pair of cut-down trousers and a baggy shirt. As soon as the clothes were on, the two started preparing the meal. As they worked, Johnny questioned Rick about what had happened to him. Outside of beating him up once, the hunters hadn't treated him too badly. He was being saved for Trader Harkness. They made Rick stay in the kitchen and wouldn't let him into the main room except to clean it up, and then kept a gun on him. The gang kept him from escaping by a very simple means. They locked up the rhinosaur hide armor in a closet. Ed kept the closet keys as well as the keys to the tank and helicopter fastened to his wrist. Rick had been watching carefully, but had not seen one chance to escape. As Johnny served the meal to the outlaw hunters, he looked the room over carefully. When the men weren't looking, he clicked a greeting to the little scarlet ape. It immediately became quite excited. A plan for escape began to shape itself in Johnny's mind. He said nothing to Rick, however. After the outlaws had eaten, Johnny and Rick had their meal. Rick thought it strange, but Johnny couldn't bring himself to eat any of the antelope. He remembered all too well the tiny antelope leader he had held in his hand. When they were finished and had washed the dishes, Johnny was all too glad for a blanket thrown on the kitchen floor, the same kind of bed Rick had. Johnny tried to push away his fears for Baba, but it was a long time before he could get to sleep. It seemed only minutes later when he was rudely awakened by a rough blow on his shoulder. Actually, it was 10 hours later, as he could see by the clock above the stove. Johnny reared up to see Ed standing over him, a smile on his thin lips, his pale eyes jubilant. "Get up and get your clothes on," he ordered. "We're going places." Johnny jumped up and reached for the baggy clothes Rick had made him. "Come on in when you're ready, and don't waste any time about it," Ed directed, and strode back into the other room. Johnny slipped on the pants and was soon stuffing in the shirt tails of an oversized shirt. Rick stood by the stove and watched, sympathy in his eyes. "Baba," he said slowly, "arrived at the colony an hour ago. I was listening at the door when the call came from Harkness. These guys are planning—" "Come on!" Ed stuck his head in through the door and cut Rick off. Numb with worry, Johnny followed Ed into the main room. "Better wrap him up in something," the outlaw called Barney said, his narrow face twisted in a strange grin. "We can't let the arrowbirds get him now." Johnny stood while they strapped man-sized armor on him and put a head globe on his head. He followed Ed out of the door and into the helicopter. The outlaw leader seated Johnny beside him, switched on the motor, and they roared away. "Where are we going?" Johnny asked. "You'll find out," Ed snapped. "Keep quiet till I tell you to talk." They flew on for almost an hour. Then Ed set the helicopter controls on automatic hover and snapped the radio telephone on. He dialed a number. Johnny saw that the number was that of colony headquarters. "Hello," Ed made his voice high and nasal. "I have information concerning Johnny Watson. Let me speak to his father." The slick-haired blond man put his hand over the telephone mouthpiece. He grabbed Johnny by the collar and stared directly into his eyes. "Listen," he said. "When your father comes on, I want you to speak to him. Tell him you were rescued by us and we've treated you okay. Understand?" Johnny nodded, his mouth dry. "I'll tell him what happened," Johnny said. He didn't understand why Ed was making such a fuss about it. Hello, this is Frederick Watson." Johnny was thrilled by the sound of his father's voice over the telephone. "Hello, Mr. Watson," Ed said in the fake voice. "We've found your boy, and here he is." Ed handed Johnny the telephone, his hand over the mouthpiece again. "Remember," he said in a threatening voice. "Hello, Dad," Johnny said into the telephone. "I'm safe, all right." "Thank God," his father's voice replied. "I was rescued by these men, and outside of making me wash dishes and sleep on the floor, they've treated me fine. I'm—" Ed took the telephone away from him in mid-sentence. "But where are you, Johnny?" Johnny could still hear his father's voice. "Right now," Ed said into the telephone. "Johnny's up in a copter. You needn't try to get a direction finder on us. Rescuing this boy cost us a lot, and we gotta be sure you'll pay us for it." "I offered a reward." Mr. Watson's voice was anxious. "It ain't enough," Ed said. We lost a tank and a copter getting him. He was surrounded by rhinosaurs. We have the boy. You've got a live marva. I figure it should be a trade. You bring the marva to the old tank road by the river, and we'll bring the boy. Bring one tank, driven by one man. That's all. Be there 48 hours from now. Do as I say, and the boy will be delivered on schedule. Hello, hello. Frederick Watson's voice was frantic. I don't know if the colony will... Ed hung up and snapped off the radio. They will, he said. Johnny's spirits had never been so low. Everything he touched seemed to turn to disaster. The colony was all but ruined. In trying to protect Baba, he had caused the marshberries to be destroyed and had given these outlaws a chance to steal the colony's marva claws. By running away with Baba, he hadn't saved the little bear at all. The outlaws, Trader Harkness outlaws, were going to get him. Johnny would not only lose Baba, but the colony, too, would lose its last chance for survival. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Venus Boy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. Venus Boy by Lee Sutton. Chapter 13. Outwitting the Outlaws. The little red monkey screamed and chattered its hate as Johnny and Ed stepped through the doorway of the cabin after their eventful flight. Johnny had noted that the cabin door was the only exit. As was usual on Venus, the exit was a double door. When the outer door was open, the inner one could not be opened. It was just like the school door. If Johnny could once get through the outer door and block it open, it would be a while before the men could break the lock on the inner door and get out. Getting out the first door would be a problem, but not too big a problem. The outlaws didn't think they could go into the jungle without armor, so they did not watch him or the door too carefully. As soon as they were inside, Ed took off Johnny's oversized armor and locked it away. He then winked at the other men and set Johnny down in front of him on a high stool. "You know who I am?" Ed asked him. "Sure, you're Ed." The big man cuffed him so hard he fell from the stool. "Boy," he said, "you never saw me before." He frowned, making his scarred face as evil as he could. "When you go back to that colony, you're going to forget you ever saw us. Do you know why?" From the floor, Johnny shook his head. "Because if you tell anybody our names or anything about us, you know what we're going to do?" Ed asked. Again Johnny shook his head. "We'll catch you and take you out into the jungle and tie you to a tree without any armor on and leave you for the arrow birds. You understand?" Johnny nodded his head. They thought they were scaring him. They talked a little while longer, describing things they might do to him if he told their names, and Johnny pretended to be afraid. "All right," Ed said after the lecture. "Get back to the kitchen." "Can I play with your monkey?" Johnny asked. Play with that monkey? Ed's pale eyebrows went up. He'd chew an ear off you. I've been trying to tame him for a month, and he don't do anything but bite. You leave him alone." "He won't bite me," Johnny said. "I don't think he will. The monkey would be a big help in escaping if only they'd let Johnny get close to him. I'll just go get some sugar cubes from the kitchen." "Let him, Ed. It'll teach the brat a lesson," the narrow-faced Barney put in. "Okay," Ed said. "Get bit if you want to." Johnny rushed through the open door into the kitchen. Rick was sitting at the table with a book beside him. "You got any candy, Rick?" Johnny asked. "Or maybe some sugar cubes?" "You better not fool with that monk, Johnny," Rick said. "He's plenty mean, like all the Venus creatures." "He won't hurt me," Johnny said. He saw a box of sugar cubes in the cupboard and grabbed it. Monkeys just love sweets. "No." Rick leaned over and a big freckled hand closed around Johnny's small brown one. He took the box of sugar away. "I'm going to tell them you got scared. Only two things will happen if you try playing with that monk. You'll get bitten and they'll get a big laugh." "Please let me, Rick," Johnny said. He paused a minute and whispered, "I've got an idea how I can get away." "What?" Rick exploded. He closed the door and went on in a whisper. "It's impossible. You haven't any armor. You don't have any weapons or a tank. Don't be silly." He paused and looked at Johnny. "Well, how were you going to do it?" "Simple," said Johnny. "First, I make friends with the monkey. Then I'll let him go and tell him to run around and jump on Ed and the rest. While they are chasing him, I'll open the inside door. I'll let him out first and dive through myself. I'll wedge open the outside door, and by the time they get their armor on and break the lock on the inside door, I'll be over the wall and gone." The words tumbled out of him. Rick shook his head. "Johnny, that week in the jungle has gone straight to your head. In the first place, how are you going to make friends with the monkey? Then, how are you going to tell him anything? And how are you going to get any armor?" "Rick," Johnny said, "I don't need any armor." "Oh, Johnny!" Rick exclaimed, exasperated. "They just won't bother me." Johnny took a deep breath. "I can talk to them, same as I can talk to the monkey." "What?" "Now listen, Rick," Johnny whispered earnestly. "I wasn't hurt when I came here, was I? I'd been in the jungle 6 Earth days without any armor." Rick was looking at him with a strange expression. "Do you remember," Johnny went on, "how I looked when you rescued me from the rhinosaur?" Rick nodded. "Did I have any armor on then?" Rick stared at Johnny for a few seconds. By golly, his mouth was slightly open in amazement. "You didn't have any armor on." "I wasn't hurt, was I?" Rick shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "But what about that leopard and the rhinosaur?" "The leopard wasn't hurting me," Johnny said. "She was trying to get me away before the men got me. She was my friend. As for the rhinosaur, well, Baba and me hadn't learned for sure about them yet." "But how can you talk to them?" Rick asked in wonder. Johnny knew he had no choice. He had to trust Rick completely. "It was Baba," Johnny said. Then, very quickly, he explained about Baba's clicks and told Rick about his 3 secrets. "Jeb said something about those clicks one time," Rick said thoughtfully. "I never dreamed it could be true." "It is true, though," Johnny insisted. Ed stuck his scarred face through the doorway. "Well, kid, getting cold feet about the monk?" "No, sir," Johnny said. "Rick was just getting me some cube sugar." "Well, hurry it up." Ed went back out. "Johnny," Rick said, "you show me with that monk, and by the moons of Saturn, I'll come with you, armor or no armor." Johnny was bewildered. This was something he hadn't counted on. He wanted to explain that there was a chance even he, alone, could not succeed without Baba. Just as Johnny started to speak, Ed appeared in the doorway again. "Well?" he said in his heavy voice. Johnny took the sugar cubes from Rick and followed Ed into the main room. As he always did, the monkey screamed and chattered at them as they entered. The little animal was chained to its perch. A spring catch too strong for its tiny fingers fastened the chain to its collar and kept it from getting away. The outlaws began to gather around. "You'll have to stay at the table way over at the other end of the room," Johnny said to the men. "He's scared of you." He pointed to the table, which was as far as possible from the door leading outside. All right, all right." The 4 men seated themselves where Johnny pointed, ready to watch the fun. Johnny walked slowly up to the tiny monkey. As he did so, its little red face twisted and it showed its razor-sharp fangs. It screamed at him. Then it leaped out, only to be jerked back cruelly as it came to the end of its chain. But it ran out as far as it could and clawed at Johnny, its eyes red. Friend pet," Johnny clicked very low in the back of his throat. The animal stopped screaming and cocked his head at him. It looked from one side to the other, as if looking for a marva behind Johnny. Johnny repeated the phrase again and again, holding the sugar cube out where the red monkey could see it and smell it. Johnny didn't have any idea how much the little animal could understand, but he went on clicking. "I'm your friend. We are going to get away from these men." He repeated this many times. Then he remembered that Rick was going to try too. "You and I and the big man in the other room are going to escape." As Johnny talked, he moved forward. Soon he was well in range of the little monkey's nails. It jumped forward. Johnny put a sugar cube in its paws. With a gurgle of pleasure, the monkey swallowed the sugar and put out its paw for more. "Jump on my shoulder," Johnny clicked. The little creature regarded him silently. Then, with a graceful hop, it was on his shoulder. "I don't believe it," Ed's voice rumbled. As soon as the hunter outlaw spoke, the little monkey growled and bared his teeth at him. The man muttered something under his breath, angry that the small boy had done what he couldn't do. He started out toward them and was quickly in range of the creature's teeth. "You'd better not," Johnny said. "He'll—" The monkey dived at Ed, his teeth slicing into the man's shoulder. The outlaw jumped back, cursing. Blood ran down his shirt. "I'm sorry, Ed," Johnny said. "Let me work with him just a little while, and maybe he'll make friends with you, too." In his anger, the man had picked up a heavy stick to hit the monkey. The other men broke into laughter. Ed grunted something and threw his stick at the men who were laughing. "Come on," he said. "Let's play cards." Johnny turned back to the monkey. For almost half an hour Johnny talked to the monkey in the marva clicking language, while the outlaws played cards across the room. He guessed the little animal could understand a little more than the mother leopard could. That wasn't too much, but it was enough. He made the creature understand that when he was released he was to fly at the men. He wasn't to hurt them, but make them chase him until Johnny could get the door open. Then the monkey was to leap for the opening. The hardest job was getting the monkey to understand that he shouldn't harm Rick if the ex-bodyguard came with them. Johnny wasn't sure the monkey understood. With his back turned to the outlaws, Johnny undid the collar about the monkey's throat. Keeping the little animal out of their sight, he walked toward the exit door. He picked up an old boot to use on the outer door. "Hey!" Ed suddenly shouted. "Where's the monk?" "After them," Johnny clicked. The monkey leaped at the oncoming Ed. He clawed his face, then leaped at the other men. He made great jumps by swinging from the light fixtures by his long black tail. Ed wheeled and charged like a bull after the tiny screaming creature. "The kid let the crazy thing loose!" he shouted. "Catch it!" "Shoot him!" yelled Shorty, drawing his ato tube pistol from its holster. Ed knocked it from his hand and it went sliding along the floor. "Want to kill us too, you fool?" In the excitement, Johnny worked the latch on the exit door and pressed the button that opened it. He saw Rick halfway through the kitchen door. Rick reached down and grabbed up something from the floor. The monkey was jumping from head to head among the yelling outlaws. Not one of them noticed what Johnny was doing. The door was open. Johnny nodded his head toward Rick, who came at a dead run. When Rick was almost there, Johnny clicked as loud as he could, "Come, friend pet, come!" In one leap, the little animal sailed across the room and landed on his shoulder. Johnny and Rick pushed through the door, slammed it behind them, and opened the outside door. Johnny paused a second and wedged the boot he had picked up into the outer door. The outer door could not close, and the safety lock would keep the inner door closed. "Come on, Johnny!" Rick shouted. "This way!" He rushed through the helicopter landing space toward the tank entrance. Rick pulled the switch that opened the duro steel door. "Dive for the nearest tree trunk," Rick shouted. "They have gun mounts on the roof." Johnny ran after Rick, his short legs unable to keep up with the older man. The little monkey was riding on top of his head, shrieking and chattering. As soon as they reached the forest, the monkey jumped into a tree. Johnny stopped dead. He needed that monkey. The little animal could tell other animals he and Rick were friendly. "Friend pet monkey, "Friend pet monkey," he clicked, "come with me." For an instant he was afraid the animal had not heard. Then with a shock he felt it drop down on his head. "Rick! Rick!" he yelled. "Stay with me!" With relief he heard the big man coming back. "You gotta stay with me," Johnny panted. "Arrow birds," Rick nodded, and ran along beside Johnny. They ran among the great pillars of the diamond wood forest until Johnny thought his breath would come no more. His feet were heavy against the springing leaves. His legs began to twist with fatigue. When he was about to fall, Rick whisked him up in his arms. The little monkey screamed and jumped at Rick's head. "No, no!" Johnny clicked. The tiny creature jumped back on Johnny's head, but he had left red claw marks on Rick's face. Far in the distance they heard the noise of a tank motor starting. The diamond wood trees were beginning to thin out. Soon they would be in the jungle of meat trees, which always surrounded a grove of the giant trees. The sound of a helicopter motor starting up was added to the sound of the tank. The noise of the tank motor lessened. The outlaws had headed in the wrong direction. The helicopter was the great danger now. Hiding under a meat tree with its heavy leaves was their best chance. "We'd better get under something, Rick," Johnny said. His breath had returned. "Let me down." Rick nodded. His breath was coming in great gasps. A heavily leafed tree, surrounded by brush, was a few hundred yards ahead of them. Johnny pointed to it and Rick nodded. Johnny prayed that there were no arrow birds feeding there. This close to the hunter's lodge there shouldn't be many animals, but arrow birds were always on the watch. As they worked through the brush to get under the meat tree, Johnny really missed Baba. The first branches were too high for either Johnny or Rick to reach. If Baba had been there, they could have easily climbed up into the protection of the tree leaves and branches. Luckily, the brush was high and thick around it, screening them from view from the side. The tree itself screened off the sky. Once they had reached the trunk of the tree, they stood wordlessly for a while, breathing hard. "Any idea where we are, Rick?" Johnny asked in a whisper. Rick's big bony face broke into a smile. He reached into a pocket. Out came a small map of the Venus continent. "Not for sure," he said, "but we can't be far from the lodge." He pointed to a mark on the map. "Once we see the lay of the land, we should be able to tell." Suddenly Rick froze stone still. Johnny looked up. An arrow bird had flown into the tree. Since its head was not in position to strike, it was probably looking for a meat fruit. Just as Johnny saw it, its head turned toward them. Johnny clicked out a sharp command for it to leave them alone. As the little purple eyes sought them out, its head snapped into striking position. But as Johnny clicked on, it moved its head back to a friendlier position. Its little purple eyes stared directly at them. Rick regarded Johnny with wonder. "I don't know what that little bear taught you, but it sure is a miracle," he said. He then reached into his shirt. "I'm still glad I got this. Did you see Ed knock it out of Shorty's hand?" He pulled an auto tube pistol out of the shirt. As soon as the gun came out, the red ape leaped from Johnny's head, screaming. The arrow bird snapped its head into position to strike. "Drop it, Rick! Drop it!" Johnny yelled. Amazement swept over Rick's face. "But why—" "Bother us not, friend pet," Johnny clicked loudly. At the same time he knocked the ato tube from Rick's hand. He was too late. The arrow bird shot with a sickening smack into Rick's shoulder. Almost as quickly it withdrew its blood-stained beak and was hovering in the air for another strike. End of chapter 13. Chapter 11 of Venus Boy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. Venus Boy by Lee Sutton. Chapter 11. The friends are separated. Johnny was hot and sweaty. He was glad to see the cool, dark cave ahead. It was like home to him by now. The mother leopard was lying in front of the cave, and the two cubs came running to greet him. "Hi, Pat. Hi, Mike," he called. They came up to be petted. "They seem to be happy to see us," Baba clicked as he bounced along. "And I'm glad to see them," Johnny said. "Golly, I'm hot." Baba and he had just been down the river trying to find a place where they might cross. Immediately after the long Venus night was over, they had gone exploring in hopes of finding a colony of wild marva nearby. But the only diamond wood groves close to the cave were still too close to the settlement. The marva must have left them. Chapter 14 of Venus Boy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. Venus Boy by Lee Sutton. Chapter 14. Captured. Rick stood rigid, his face twisting with pain, a hand clutching his upper arm. The greenish bird hovered in the air, its wings a blur of motion. "We are friends. We are friends. Bother us not, friend pet," Johnny clicked deep in his throat. The bird continued to hover, its little purple eyes darting back and forth from Johnny to the wounded Rick. Its bloody head stayed in arrow position, but it drifted farther away. Johnny remembered that when he had had an arrow bird on his shoulder, the others had left him alone. He dreaded changing his command, but he did. "Come to your friend," he clicked firmly. The arrow bird stared at him distrustfully, but came closer. The monkey dropped back on Johnny's head. With a sigh of relief, Johnny saw the arrow bird's head snap out of attack position. He put out his hand, and the arrow bird lit on it. "Are you hurt bad, Rick?" he asked. The words made the arrow bird flutter with alarm, but Johnny soothed it by petting it with his other hand. Rick shook his head. "Not too bad," he said through clenched teeth. "The thing seemed to dodge when you made that clicking noise." "I'm sorry, Rick," Johnny said. "You just shouldn't have shown that gun. You'll have to leave it behind. If they think you'd harm any of them, they'll kill you just like that. The monkeys almost got me because of a pocket knife." "I didn't know," Rick said. He looked at the bird on Johnny's shoulder. "Seems peaceful enough now." "You'd better let him sit on your shoulder, Rick." Johnny looked down at the arrow bird and stroked it again. When it was quiet, he placed it on Rick's shoulder. The man was nervous and the bird was worried, but they both did as they were told. They waited under the tree while the helicopter went back and forth above them. Johnny looked at Rick's wound. It didn't look too serious, but Johnny knew better than to count on that. The slightest arrow bird wound could be deadly if not treated. Johnny had seen hunters brought into the colony sick from an untreated scratch. They should have brought an emergency kit, but the kits were only carried in special pockets of the armor. They let Rick's wound bleed to cleanse it as much as possible. Then Johnny bound the arm tightly and made a sling for it from a piece of Rick's shirt. Rick gave Johnny his wristwatch to wear, since his wrist was hidden by the sling. After that, they waited. It seemed the helicopter would never go away. Once it hovered almost directly above them, but then went on. While they waited, Johnny looked over the map. The outlaw hideout was not far from the colony, as he had feared. They had to start soon and make good time, but they just might be able to make it to the meeting place the outlaws had set before Johnny's father got there. There was a fighting chance if Rick didn't get too sick. Finally, they heard the sound of the helicopter landing far in the distance. Taking direction from the map, they set out on their way. Rick's wound was less painful now, but Johnny kept his eye on his red-haired friend. They started out at a fast clip, following an animal track, which led in the direction they wanted to go. In a few hours of steady marching, they were a safe distance from the outlaw hideout. Johnny's idea was working out. Several flights of arrow birds had passed them by with no more than a glance in their direction. One flight had hovered above them while the arrow bird on Rick's shoulder twittered and shrieked to them. Then they had flown off at top speed. A troop of monkeys had also let them pass without doing them any harm. Hundreds of small red apes had followed along beside them for a time. Johnny's monkey chattered to them from his perch on the boy's head. Then they too had swung off through the trees at top speed. Rick had been awed, for he had never seen Venus animals so close except when they were attacking. At first, Rick's strides had been long and Johnny had had to run every few steps to keep up. Now Rick's steps were short and slow. He seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. They had stopped and cleansed his wound again at a spring and rebounded, but he was not doing well. The big red-haired man was pale under his freckles. His lips were set tight. Johnny kept close beside him as they moved forward. They had worked out a path to follow that skirted diamond wood groves and avoided rivers. It was too easy to become lost in the dense forest, and Johnny was very unsure of what river snakes would do. Suddenly Rick stumbled. He stopped and balanced himself by leaning on Johnny's shoulder. He looked at Johnny with bloodshot eyes, sighed, and crumpled up on the ground. The arrow bird that had been sitting on his shoulder hovered in the air above him, making little squeaking noises. He flew toward Johnny and then down an animal trail that led off toward a diamondwood grove. As Johnny leaned over to look at Rick, the monkey jumped from Johnny's head. Johnny stared down at Rick Saunders' face. His cheeks were flushed, but the rest of his face was gray. The little monkey sniffed the wounded man and chattered something at Johnny. Then he too ran down the side trail. When Johnny paid no attention, he came up to Johnny and plucked his sleeve, chattering all the while. Johnny looked around. He thought the monkey was drawing his attention to some antelope berries growing down the path. Johnny clicked to the little red monkey to gather some. When the red monkey returned, clutching a cluster of the large berries in each tiny paw, Johnny took them and squeezed the clear red juice into Rick's mouth. The man coughed and turned his face away, but gradually his eyes opened. They were dull and feverish. His hand went to his shoulder and he winced. In the few hours that had passed, his arm and shoulder had already swollen a great deal. He raised his head. Johnny helped him to his feet, but when he staggered, Johnny helped him lie down again on a patch of grass by the antelope berry bush. "I can't go any further, Johnny." Rick's voice was hoarse. "Those birds must have some kind of poison on their beaks. That wound feels like it's on fire." "It's not poison, Rick," Johnny explained. "They eat the meat fruit and little pieces stick to their beaks. The pieces get rotten and infect wounds bad." Johnny remembered that Rick was an Earthie and had been on Venus barely a year. "There's only one thing to do," Johnny went on. "I'll have to light a signal fire with lots of smoke. Somebody'll see us then." Rick shook his head slowly. "No, Johnny, it won't do. If those hunters come, they'll get you again, and they're likely to finish me off. You take the map and go on." Rick's voice trailed away. He struggled to sit up. Johnny stepped forward, wondering what was wrong. The monkey leaped off his head and bounded into a tree. Slowly, Rick raised his good arm and pointed directly behind Johnny. Johnny turned. Staring at him through a bush was a coal-black saber-toothed leopard, crouched to spring. "Friend pet, go away," Johnny clicked in the marva tongue. Oh, if Baba were only here. The monkey chattered from a tree. Go away," Johnny repeated. Then he saw a second leopard, a third. None of them was his friend, the mother leopard. These leopards stood almost a foot higher and were solid black. Their saber fangs were a full foot long. These were deadly males, hunting in a pack. The one behind the bush gave a coughing growl. All three slinked slowly toward Johnny and Rick on silent feet, their mouths half open, their white teeth shining. "Go away! Bother us not, friend pets! Bother us not!" Johnny repeated. The leopards moved smoothly forward, their steel-like muscles rippling under the shining black fur. Frantically, Johnny turned to Rick, who was struggling to his feet. "They won't obey, Rick." "Run, Johnny," Rick said. "Run for a tree." Rick thrust the boy behind him, but Johnny would not leave his friend. Rick turned, pulling Johnny, and started to run. At the same moment, a leopard sprang through the air, high over their heads. A split second later, he was in front of them, barring their way, his gold eyes glistening, his fanged mouth giving forth a low growl. The growl meant, "Come." Johnny looked about. Not 4 steps away was another of the lion-sized cats. They were ringed around by the creatures. Johnny tried clicking again, but they paid no attention. "My arm, Johnny," Rick groaned. He ran his hand over his forehead, which was dripping sweat. Slowly his legs gave way, and he fell in a heap beside Johnny. The leopards moved closer, their mouths wide. The one in front was getting so close that Johnny could feel its breath blowing against his bare arm. Then it moved too fast for Johnny to follow. Johnny felt the great jaws close around his middle, and he was hurled off his feet. Frantically, he beat at the big head. The jaws tightened, gripping him painfully. As Johnny cried out in pain, he saw the other 2 leopards leap upon Rick. A few seconds later, Johnny was being carried down the path in the jaws of the monster cat. The jaws had tightened no more than was necessary to hold him firmly as the animal trotted along. From this strange position, Johnny witnessed an even stranger sight. Behind the leopard carrying Johnny strode the 2 others. Side by side they walked, dividing Rick Saunders' weight between them. One had its jaws about Rick's arms and shoulders. The other held his hips and legs. They moved along easily, their heads held high so that his feet would not drag on the ground. Then Johnny saw that his arrowbird friend was riding on the shoulder of one of the leopards that was carrying Rick. He heard a chattering noise and knew that the little red monkey was close by. The leopards were taking them someplace, but who could know where? In his odd position, Johnny could not tell even the direction they were going. But soon they were in the patchwork shadow of a meat tree forest. Here the leopards had their lairs, but they did not stop. They went on and on. Johnny kept trying to watch the leopards which carried Rick. Once in a while he could catch a glimpse of them, Rick's head bobbing as they moved. He was still unconscious. Then Johnny heard a shout and a scuffling noise. The leopard carrying him turned around. Rick was conscious. His head was turning about wildly and he was yelling. His eyes lit on Johnny. "What's happening?" he all but screamed. "They're taking us somewhere," Johnny answered. "They haven't hurt me yet." Rick was kicking his feet and struggling, making it hard for the leopards to walk. Johnny could see their jaws tightening as Rick struggled. "You better not fight, Rick," Johnny said. "You can't get away and they'll just hurt you more. I'll tell them you won't fight if they'll hold you easier." He clicked the message to the big cats. His own leopard turned back up the trail, and he couldn't see what the other leopards did. A few seconds later he heard Rick's voice. "You were right, Johnny. When I eased up, they eased up too." Then he laughed in a strained way. "I wish they'd eat us right now and get it over with." "Maybe they won't." They said no more. They were coming to the edge of the meat tree grove. As was often the case, the last group of meat trees was beside a river. Beyond was a diamondwood grove. The three animals plunged into the cool water and soon were swimming with Johnny's and Rick's heads held well above the water. On the opposite bank they dived into the shadow of the diamondwood grove. As soon as they entered the grove, Johnny was startled to see that there were several antelope walking beside them. Then suddenly the little red monkey he had rescued from Ed was squatting on the leopard's back. Johnny heard a swishing sound almost under his head. By twisting hard, he could see the ground. There was a river snake crawling beside them. Its ugly horned head was right beneath him. It was the first time he had ever seen one. Then his heart leaped. He heard the clicking of the marva language. Johnny twisted his body against the leopard's teeth, trying to see where the clicking was coming from. The leopard growled, and Johnny lay still again. "Take the big killer to the healer," the voice clicked. "The little killer take to the council." The clicks were somehow different from Baba's, firmer and louder, but Johnny could understand them perfectly. Johnny caught sight of the two leopards carrying Rick. They were turning down another path. The river snake and the antelope took the same path, but Johnny's leopard went on forward. After a short time the leopard stopped and very carefully opened its jaws and eased Johnny to the ground. It turned and walked a few steps away. There it crouched. Johnny got slowly to his feet. The little red monkey jumped on his head. The arrowbird perched on his shoulder. In a clearing among the diamondwood trees, Johnny stood in the center of a circle of jewel bears, their blue nails glowing in the half light. All but one or two were dark about the muzzle. They sat on their haunches, staring straight at Johnny. End of chapter 14.
Okay, so yay, all done. Hope you enjoyed it. It's quite exciting. He's gonna get gotted by the thingies and oh, so and the little bear's friends saved him and Yay! Okay, next week we'll do the rest of, or next time, Sunday, we'll do the rest of them and see how it turns out. See if he gets rescued. See if the bad guys wreck his home and all that kind of stuff. And oh, okay. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful day. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Okay, I will um I will talk to you guys later. Uh, you have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you next time. Bye. What's happening? I what did I do? I don't know what happened. Why am I stuck? I'm stuck. I am stuck. I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna try and close it like I'm supposed to. Anyway, let's see. Exit, exit, save. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. Exit, exit, exit. Why are you being so grumpy for? Gosh darn it. Okay. I have no idea what's going on.